Welcome back to our special attack on Israel 1 year later. Can you believe it's been a year? I want to go right to our friend Joel Pollak, senior editor-at-large of Breitbart News and the author of the relatively new book. You have to buy this. It's called The Agenda: What Trump Should Do in His First 100 Days. You should buy it now so that when you're convincing people to vote, you have a huge list of things about why this election matters. People who say, oh, the two parties are basically the same, like that's such nonsense, especially when you read the agenda. And then when Trump wins, now you got a ton of things that we got to get doing. So that's the book called The Agenda by Joel Pollak. Good to talk to you, Joel.
Good to be with you.
So you've been to Israel a couple times since the attack over a year ago.
5 times since the attack.
Yeah, what have you seen? What things still haunt you today?
Well, I approach this a little differently, I think, than many people. I don't feel haunted any more today than I have been the last year. What I'm looking at is the progress Israel has made. There are still 100 hostages in Gaza, and there is still so much to go, I think, in this war. But Israel has achieved so much in a year of fighting. It has smashed the Hamas military as an organization. Yes, the leaders still survive, and the hostage takers, they survive as a guerrilla army, really. But Hamas has ceased to function as a coherent military organization. They've lost over 10,000 of their terrorist fighters. So Israel has achieved that. Israel is now busy mopping up in Lebanon after destroying what was thought to be a much greater threat than Hamas, which was Hezbollah, which is backed and armed and funded by Iran. Israel simply destroyed the leadership of Hezbollah and wiped out their communication system so they couldn't coordinate their rocket fire at Israel. So instead of the waves of rocket fire, there are only sporadic firings of rockets as Israel goes town to town in southern Lebanon, exposing and destroying the weapons caches and rocket launchers and so forth that Hezbollah has hidden there among civilian homes. Israel is routing Hezbollah in the Third Lebanon War. And of course, Israel has been able to strike back at Yemen. The Houthis fire ballistic missiles once in a while, but Israel has bombed the Houthis in their port, which the United States hesitated to do. And now Israel's contemplating a strike on Iran, which launched for the second time a ballistic missile attack against Israel last week, but which again failed to do any significant damage. Israel is now well within its rights and has international support, actually, for a response to Iran. And it is choosing the time, place, and manner in which it responds. So Israel is actually much stronger after a year of fighting. That doesn't mean October 7th was a good thing, but it does point to the resilience and coherence of Israeli society. Keep in mind that many of the soldiers fighting on the front lines today are not full-time professional soldiers. Many of them are reservists. Many of them are people who have jobs and families. There are people I know, friends of mine who went to college with me in the United States, who then were either from Israel or moved to Israel. They're out there. They're fighting right now. People my age or slightly younger than me with families and so forth. They are the ones making these advances. That tells you something about the strength of Israeli society. So I don't think October 7th is in any way a happy occasion, but I don't think that it's only an occasion for mourning. I do think that there are things that the world has discovered about the strength and resilience of Israel as a nation that it didn't know on October 6, 2023.
So there's even something of significance of the fact that I asked you pretty much like a reflection of the destruction that was and the horribleness that was. And you immediately pivoted to the successes and the hope that is to come. And I love that. I love that you pivoted in that way.
I don't mean to make light of it. I mean, it's obviously one of the most horrific terror attacks that's ever occurred in the history of human civilization. But I also feel like there's this assumption that grief has to overwhelm us and that the most appropriate posture for us to take in our political discourse is that of victims. And I think Israelis feel that they were victimized, but they're not victims. They feel very much in charge of their own destiny today. And so I think there's a lesson we can draw from that as Americans.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Gosh, it's so easy, and it's many people's and many cultures perhaps instinct to dwell on what was as opposed to focusing on where we're moving.
No, it's just really us in the West. It's just the West in the latter stages of post-capitalist, post-nationalist decadence that we would prefer to cry rather than act. What Netanyahu is doing in Lebanon is raining these precision missiles down on the heads of Hezbollah commanders, these people who vowed to take over northern Israel and march to Jerusalem and slaughter in the hundreds of thousands where Hamas had only slaughtered in its thousands. What Netanyahu did was respond to that. And that used to be the West's approach. That's very much in line with our Judeo-Christian texts and moral lessons. It's very much in line with Greece and Rome and the stories that built those civilizations and fashioned them into world powers. It's not in line with Marxism, with post-colonial studies, with Michel Foucault, with all of the ideologies and ideas that have permeated our institutions and our elites and that have made us weaker in the face of these threats. I do think Americans still retain a core of resilience. You saw the way we responded after 9/11, the way the passengers took down the plane, Flight 93, when the hijackers wanted to fly it into the White House or into Congress. That's in our national character, but it does have to be cultivated. A child doesn't spring into the world ready to behave in that way in a moment of crisis. It's the kind of value that you pass on from generation to generation. Are we doing that in the United States? We are doing it, but we're doing it outside of our institutions, which is a problem. But we are doing it. I think what Israel is doing is now institutionalizing it, and that's why it's able to respond to things like October 7th.
Yeah, I think we're doing it in spite of. So what, how do I want to word this? There's one specific question. I'll remind you in a second, but what do you make of the fact that it's been a year so far? And my initial instinct was, well, let's wrap this up quick. And it's taken a year. But I don't know, you have a better perspective. Do you think a year is still pretty quick for all those things to have happened?
No, I think the war could have progressed much further in the direction of resolution than it has. But the Biden administration has dragged its feet at every turn. Initially, they came out and warned Iran and Hezbollah not to open a second front. Those warnings have been ignored. And then when Israel wanted to go into Rafah, the southernmost town of Gaza near the Egyptian border, and destroy the remnants of Hamas, the Biden administration said no, and Israel had to delay 3 months. The Biden administration and Vice President Harris specifically said that it would withhold weapons from Israel if it actually went into Rafah, and it did so. So there was a delay of 3 months, and there's also probably been a delay in the attack on Hezbollah in Lebanon. Lots of Israelis feel it could have been done earlier, but Netanyahu was constrained by Biden's demands. No Israeli leader can afford to ignore the United States completely because the U.S. gives so much military aid and economic aid to Israel, especially in wartime. So he has had to listen to Biden and Harris, and they have slowed this down. In April, when Iran fired 300 projectiles, that includes drones, cruise missiles, ballistic missiles, at Israel, Biden came out and said Israel should not retaliate in a way that would escalate the conflict. Well, what do you call attacking someone's country with ballistic missiles that could be tipped with whatever kind of warhead Iran seeks to attach, whether chemical weapons or, God forbid, nuclear weapons, which they are very close to developing? I mean, what should you do? So Biden said, well, Israel was successful at shooting them down with some help from the United States and other countries. Therefore, because these missiles caused no damage, you shouldn't retaliate. But the intention of the missiles was to cause a lot of damage. So Biden has withheld Israel from deterring further attacks. That's why a second one happened. And we're looking at this Biden-Harris administration, and it's actually affected the way I think Americans view the White House commitment to our own security. I mean, look at the border.
Yes.
They won't secure our border. They tell Israel not to fight against terrorists. Well, what will they defend? Their primary concern with the military has been ideological, rooting out any Trump supporters and then indoctrinating everybody in transgenderism. That's not how you build a military. By the way, Israel has transgender soldiers and has for a long time, but they haven't tried to upend the entire concept of gender. Somehow, in our institutions, we're not content with tolerating the one or two people who might be a little different but still want to participate. We have to upend everything for everyone. That's why recruitment rates are down. That's why retention rates are down. That's why we can't field an effective fighting force at the moment. And it's because of this mismanagement. Whereas in Israel, where the choices are much clearer, they make the right ones. I'm not saying we would trade our position for theirs, but we're looking at Biden and Harris and wondering why they're not thinking about American strength, why they're not thinking about projecting an image of resolution, why they're always trying to give in to the bad guys.
Great point. That was essentially the question I did want to get to a moment ago, and we'll throw on top of that Kamala announcing she's given $157 million more dollars to the civilians of Lebanon, while we have Americans right here, North Carolina in particular, who are suffering through Hurricane Helene. Yet we have to give more money to the people of Lebanon for some reason. We only got about a minute, but I want to tie those two last statements you made together. So if the Israeli principle is resolve and responding accordingly, with clarity, how would you define the Kamala worldview with this issue?
Win the next election. That's her only worldview. She doesn't really have convictions. She comes out of San Francisco and the left, so she has left-wing views when she has views. But basically, Kamala Harris has no real conviction except whatever gets her ahead. She tried to be a tough prosecutor in the early 2000s. Then when that was no longer popular on the left, she tried to be a George Soros-style radical judicial reform or criminal justice reform prosecutor. She doesn't have convictions. The Biden approach is the Obama approach, which is lead from behind, maybe even not lead from behind, but appease from behind. Because remember, the Ukraine war happened because Biden appeased Russia. He lifted the sanctions Trump had on Nord Stream 2 and all of that. So there really is no leadership. The only thing Biden is good at doing is leaving our allies in the lurch, especially Israel. And that's it. There's no real leadership at all. Trump's philosophy is very simple: America first, peace through strength. And you know what? It worked for 4 years. You can't argue with 4 years of peace, not just calm, but actual peace. The Abraham Accords, the expansion of peace throughout the Middle East in a region no one ever thought would have that kind of peace. That was under Trump because people understood America was strong. When America's strong, when America takes care of American interests first, and American interests include defending American allies, nobody messes with us. The world is a more stable place. The contrast is very stark.
Joel Pollak, senior editor at large of Breitbart News. And buy the book. Buy it right now. The Agenda: What Trump Should Do in His First 100 Days. An incredible resource to know before the election when you're trying to get out the vote, encourage people to vote, and then of course when he wins this thing. Now we gotta win. Now we gotta really win. Joel Pollak, Breitbart News. Good to talk to you, Joel.
Thanks.